It really strikes you, doesn't it? How just one single event, maybe an unexpected kindness or even, a terrible injustice can just ripple through people's lives, creating this whole interconnected web of stories.
Absolutely. And chapter 14 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is our source for today's deep dive, it just lays that bare. It's such a powerful chain reaction.
Exactly.
It's more than just like a quick look behind the curtain of the monster's own story. It's really a revelation of the human drama that's shaping his whole world. We're about to get into a hidden history here, one with really lasting consequences.
And that's precisely our mission today, right? To unpack these intertwined fates. The Lacey family, Felix, who's so principled, and then Safie, this fiercely independent woman. We're going to trace their sacrifices, the bitterness of betrayal, and ultimately what their story tells us about the human spirit's resilience. So for you listening, think of this as uncovering this vital, almost standalone story hidden inside a classic. It gives us these deep insights into justice, love across cultures, and the just unforeseen impact of our choices.
Yeah, a history lesson almost.
Totally. So let's start piecing it together. Who were the Laceys before all this? Before their lives got tangled up with the Turk, Safie's father?
Okay, so before all the drama, we're focusing on the Laceys. They were basically a picture of respectability and comfort in Paris.
Right.
Old de Lacy, the father, he was well-established, had a good reputation, comfortable life. His son, Felix, had even served his country. And Agatha, the daughter, she moved in pretty esteemed social circles.
So they were doing well.
Yeah, by all accounts, a virtuous family, enjoying, a moderate fortune, nothing too flashy, but comfortable and respected.
Okay, so a family that seems secure, well-regarded. What was the catalyst then? What happened to cause this dramatic fall from grace?
Well, the text is pretty direct about it. The father of Safie had been the cause of their ruin. He was a Turkish merchant living in Paris for quite some time, and for reasons the story suggests were more about him becoming obnoxious to the government.
Obnoxious how?
Well, it seems like a mix of his wealth and maybe his religion making people uneasy. He gets arrested and condemned to death, and this happens just as Safie arrives from Constantinople to be with him.
Wow, that sounds... like a miscarriage of justice waiting to happen.
Yeah.
The source even points out that the injustice of his sentence was very flagrant, right? It caused public indignation.
Exactly. It strongly implies that prejudice against his religion, envy of his money were the real reasons, not, actual criminal acts.
Which says a lot about the social vulnerabilities back then, doesn't it?
It's a critical point. This perceived injustice is like the first domino. It shows how easily prejudice could just undermine someone's standing and how public opinion, even if it sees the injustice, might not be enough to stop it.
And this is what gets Felix involved.
Precisely. This very injustice sparks Felix's moral outrage.
And he doesn't just, complain about it. He actually does something. Tell us about what actions he took.
Right. So Felix witnesses a trial, and he's just overcome by uncontrollable horror and indignation at the verdict.
Understandable.
In that moment, he decides he has to help the Turk escape. So he starts looking into every possible way to do it. His first attempts to get into the prison fail, but then he finds this less guarded window.
And it just happens to be...
the window of the Turk's cell. Pure chance. Or maybe fate,
Wow. You can almost picture it, can't you?
Yeah.
This secret meeting at the prison window. Felix risking everything for this stranger. How did he even communicate his plan?
Under the cover of darkness, Felix manages to get his intentions across through the grated window. The Turk, naturally, is overwhelmed with relief, gratitude. He immediately starts offering Felix huge rewards, promises of wealth.
But Felix wasn't motivated by money, was he? The story makes a point of him turning those offers down. What does that tell us about him?
Exactly. He was driven by the strong sense of justice, moral duty. But then Safie arrives on the scene, and that adds another layer.
Ah, right.
During her visits to her father in prison, she expresses such deep gratitude towards Felix, and it really moves him. The narrator even notes that Felix saw the captive possessed a treasure which would fully reward his toil and hazard.
Clearly meaning Safie.
Clearly meaning Safie. So while his first impulse was purely altruistic, her presence definitely became a big factor.
So the seeds of romance are sown right there, amidst all this danger and injustice. And the Turk, he notices this connection, doesn't he? How does he use it?
Oh, he's sharp. He sees the impression his daughter made on Felix and tries to lock in Felix's help by promising him Safie's hand in marriage once he's safely away.
Clever move. And Felix. The text says he was too delicate to accept it directly, but His actions kind of suggest otherwise.
Yeah, his initial hesitation was probably about not wanting his honorable actions to seem like, a transaction. But he definitely cherished the idea of marrying Safie. It was like the ultimate reward for everything he was risking, the path to his own happiness. And this sets up their relationship, which grows through letters.
Ah, the letters. These seem really important. The narrator even mentions having copies.
Yeah.
What do they reveal about Safie and her feelings?
They were crucial. An old servant who knew French helped them correspond. Safie's letters were full of heartfelt gratitude for Felix trying to free her father. She also shared bits about her own tough situation, her emotional turmoil. These exchanges clearly just strengthened Felix's determination and deepened their emotional connection between them.
And Safie herself, she had this really compelling backstory that shaped her desires, her rebellious streak. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, her background is key. Her mother was a Christian Arab who'd been enslaved by the Turks, but then married Safie's father because she was incredibly beautiful. And this mother had a huge influence on Safie. Having known freedom herself, she deeply resented her own subjugation. She instilled in Safie this passionate desire for knowledge, for independence ideas, totally at odds with the restricted life expected of women in her father's culture.
So her mother planted the seeds for wanting a different kind of life, a life with autonomy.
Exactly. Safie really admired her mother's strength and mind, and she dreaded the thought of going back to Asia, to the confined life of a harem, which she saw as just full of infantile amusements.
Not exactly stimulating.
Not at all. She craved intellectual pursuits, noble goals, and the chance to marry a Christian in a country where women had more freedom, more social standing. It really paints a picture of her internal struggle, her longing for a different world.
That context definitely makes her attraction to Felix in the West make so much more sense. So with this bond growing, the escape plan moves ahead. How did they actually manage to get the Turk out?
Okay, so the night before the planned execution, Felix puts his plan into motion. He'd already gotten passports for his father, sister, and himself.
The whole family was involved then.
Oh, yeah. Old Lacey and Agatha pretended to leave Paris, which let them hide out in a quieter part of the city while Felix handled the actual escape.
Sounds like quite the operation. Coordinated, but desperate. And the journey to freedom? It wasn't easy, I imagine.
Definitely not. Felix guides the Turk through France, down to Lyon, then over the Alps, which is a huge undertaking, to Leghorn, a port city in Italy.
Leghorn, okay.
The Turk planned to stay there until he could find a ship heading to Turkish territory.
And Safie went with them on this dangerous trip. That must have solidified her bond with Felix even more. It almost seems like things are working out, but then betrayal rears its ugly head.
Right, it's insidious. Even while he's outwardly encouraging Felix and Safie, repeating his marriage promise, the Turk is secretly planning to take Safie away once he's out of French reach.
Why? Just because Felix was Christian?
Exactly. He had this deep prejudice against his daughter marrying a Christian. It really shows that complex mix of gratitude clashing with ingrained cultural bias.
That's deeply deceptive. And Felix's actions, they had consequences beyond just the Turks' escape, right? The French government wouldn't just ignore something like that.
No way. The French authorities reacted fast and harshly. They soon discovered Felix's role in the escape, and Lacey and Agatha were immediately thrown into prison.
Oh, no. While Felix was free with Safie.
Yeah, into a noisome dungeon, the text says. Meanwhile, Felix, totally unaware of what's happened to his family, is enjoying his freedom with Safie in Italy. That contrast is just stark. It highlights the unintended, far-reaching consequences of even well-meaning actions.
That must have been absolutely crushing for Felix when he found out the guilt.
It tormented him. As soon as he learned about his family's imprisonment, he quickly made arrangements with the Turk. The deal was, if the Turk managed to sail away before Felix got back, Safie would be placed in a convent in Leghorn for safety. Then, in this incredible act of self-sacrifice, Felix goes back to Paris and turns himself in, hoping that would free his father and sister.
A truly noble gesture. But it didn't work, did it?
Sadly, no. Lacey and Agatha were stuck in prison for 5 agonizing months before they finally went to trial. And the outcome was devastating.
What happened?
They lost their entire fortune and were sentenced to perpetual exile from France. They ended up in that little cottage in Germany, the same place the creature eventually finds them. It just shows how fragile their status was, how irreversible their ruin became.
The Turk's betrayal.
Yeah.
It didn't stop there, did it? Even after everything that Laceys sacrificed.
Unbelievably, no. When the Turk heard about Felix's total ruin, the poverty they were now facing, he just threw away any last shred of gratitude or honor.
What did he do?
He left Italy with Safie, and then, as a final insult, he sent Felix this tiny sum of money, suggesting it might somehow help him in his ruined state.
That is just breathtakingly callous. Wow.
It really shows the depths of his self-interest, his complete disregard for the huge sacrifices made for him.
No wonder the story says these events weighed so heavily on Felix, making him the most miserable of his family when the creature first sees them. Like, he could maybe handle the poverty if it was just for his good deed, but the Turk's ingratitude and losing Safie, that must have been unbearable.
Exactly. But then the story takes another really compelling turn, doesn't it? Safie. She turns out to have a will just as strong as her desire for freedom.
Yes. Okay, so news of Felix's ruin reaches Leghorn. The Turk tells Safie, forget him, pack your bags, we're going back home. But Safie wasn't having it, was she?
Not at all. Her generous nature was outraged, the text says. She tried to reason with him, appeal to his sense of fairness, gratitude, but he just angrily shut her down, demanding obedience.
But she had other plans.
She absolutely did. Having tasted the possibility of a different life, she was resolute.
So tell us about her defiance, her incredible journey to find Felix again. It's such a testament to her courage.
Okay, so just a few days later, the Turk tells Safie he thinks their location in Leghorn is compromised, and he plans to sail for Constantinople within hours. His plan: leave Safie behind with the servant, who'd follow later with the rest of his stuff.
Sneaky.
Very. But when Safie was alone, she made her move. The idea of living in Turkey was just abhorrent to her. Her Christian faith from her mother, her love for Felix both pushed against it. And crucially, she found some of her father's papers.
And they revealed
Felix's exile and the location of his new, humble cottage.
Talk about seizing your own destiny. She just took control.
She really did. She gathered some jewels, whatever money she could get her hands on, and left Italy with an attendant who knew a bit of Turkish. They set off on this incredibly difficult journey towards Germany.
Wow.
But tragically, about 20 leagues from the Lacey cottage, her attendant got sick and died.
Oh no, leaving Safie completely alone.
Completely alone, unable to speak the language, totally unfamiliar with the customs. It really highlights how vulnerable she was, the huge risks she was taking.
That must have been terrifying. How did she possibly find her way to Felix after that?
It's quite remarkable, actually. Fortunately, the Italian attendant had mentioned their final destination before she died. The woman running the house where they'd stayed took pity on Safie's desperate situation.
Thank goodness for kindness.
Absolutely. This compassionate woman made sure Safie was safely guided the rest of the way to the Lacey cottage. This final act of kindness brings Safie back to Felix against all odds.
It really does underscore her resilience and the unexpected kindness of strangers. So looking back at this whole intricate web, what are the main takeaways? What's the lasting significance of this chapter in the bigger picture of Frankenstein?
Well, this chapter is just incredibly rich thematically, isn't it? You see this stark contrast between justice and injustice, unwavering loyalty versus just profound betrayal. It really shines a light on the complexities that come from cultural differences. And maybe most powerfully, it shows the strength of individual will, especially with Safie defying her father's patriarchal control.
Her agency is key.
Totally. It powerfully shows how one single act, like Felix's initial compassionate choice, can just set off this cascade of unforeseen, deeply impactful consequences for so many people. And yeah, it presents Safie as someone actively shaping her own life, rejecting the limits put on her by her culture and her father.
It's a detour from the main monster narrative,
Right.
But it feels so essential.
It really is. It underscores that even in a story dominated by the extraordinary, the most powerful forces are often deeply, profoundly human. Love, sacrifice, betrayal.
Absolutely. It's a potent reminder that even while we're focused on the creature, these intense human dramas are playing out, driven by these fundamental struggles for freedom and connection.
And what's really compelling is how these human stories then feed back into the main plot. The creature watches all this, the generosity, the cruelty, and it shapes his complex understanding of humanity.
Right, it informs his isolation, his sense of injustice.
And ultimately, his path towards revenge. It's a crucial piece for understanding his tragic trajectory. You can't really get the creature without understanding what he saw in the Laceys and Safie.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. This deep dive into Chapter 14, it really unveils this complex, compelling network of human motivations, doesn't it?
It really does.
It shows so vividly how choices, even seemingly small ones, can have these huge, unexpected ripples. Gives us some much richer, more nuanced view of the world beyond just Victor Frankenstein and his creation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And connecting it back to the bigger picture of the novel, you see how these stories of compassion and cruelty directly fuel the creature's education about humanity, and that, in turn, influences his own tragic path. It's a vital piece, often overlooked.
Definitely. So as you, our listener, continue thinking about this chapter, maybe consider the power dynamics, right? Cultural expectations versus individual rebellion, how that shapes destiny. How do those forces still play out today?
Good question.
And what does Safie's incredible journey really tell us about the sheer force of personal conviction? Just some thoughts to mull over after diving into this really captivating story within a timeless classic.